Welcome back to another episode of Wicca and Witchcraft for Dummies. So today we're going to do chapter 4, believing in ethics, responsibility, and personal relationship with deity. So in this chapter, we talk about walking an individual path with the divine, rejecting dogma and control, as well as acting ethically, responsibly, and respectfully. So I can't emphasize this enough. Wicca is a personal spiritual path. Yes, we come together as groups to celebrate together and learn from each other, but it's a personal experience with the divine. Wicca doesn't have any holy book or written doctrine that's been passed down through the ages for Wiccans to follow. We create our own holy books of teachings, practices, spiritual experiences, and our own understanding with your Book of Shadows. This is my Book of Shadows, and unfortunately it's taken some damage and I have to get it repaired. But my Book of Shadows that I made, handmade from 2 pieces of birch bark. I steamed them and flattened them and stained them. I did all the hand stitching and glue. These are fabric from, it's actually a scrapbook that I was doing for my wedding, and it kind of meant something to me. And as well as the beads were the beads that were in the candle displays at our wedding. So it meant something to me. And so that's what I used to make my Book of Shadows, because it needs to mean something. And in here are my spells and my incantations and my binding spells. And they're not something that you share with somebody else. These are very personal. When you write a spell, you don't, hang on. Sorry, I need to gather my thoughts. It all goes back to intent. Everything you do is with intent. So can you read a spell off a piece of paper and light the candle and make the chant and do the thing? Sure you can. What do you expect to get back from that? Probably not a whole lot. So the more you put of yourself and the more energy you put into the spell, the working, the incantation, the prayer, whatever it is that you're doing, the more you're going to get out of it. So my Book of Shadows is a personal book of spells, usually using rhyme, kind of like your own personal poetry, but a spell that's basically your intent. What is it that I want to say to the world? What is it that I want to put out into the energy of the divine? What is it that I want to say? And how much energy am I willing to put into it to get that message out there? So Wicca doesn't have a hierarchy of leaders who counsel people on how to live or how to worship or how to enforce religious laws and obedience. Each person has their own relationship with deity, and each Wiccan serves as their own clergy. There's no one putting out rules. Now, we do have members of Wicca who have ranking titles, but it's not by a position of leadership. It's just by a position of how much knowledge that person has of the craft over the years. That person is never superior to anyone else. They're just more knowledgeable, and that label denotes them as such. We do, however, have principles and ethics that actually guide our behavior, and our goal is to balance personal freedom with responsibility and respect for the sacredness of all life. Basically, the people of many religions believe that deity or God is usually transcendent. So it means that he's above us or above the world looking down. He's separate from humankind. We're not, God. We're separate from that deity. A person's own nature, the self, is separate from that. But in this viewpoint of religion, it's basically saying that yourself can't be trusted. This higher power has to look over you, and that you can't be trusted. You need rules and laws to control your nature and your behavior. A person can't trust his or her own self and will because they're separate from God. And because people can't trust their own natures, religious rules will tell people what to do. Religious dogma spells out the laws, the teachings, the beliefs, and the principles of a religion, as well as the consequences of breaking the laws. The laws and rules, just like God, are elevated or separate from the world. They're unquestionable, infallible. People must follow the rules and laws regardless of the human cost. Doesn't matter. The laws are the laws. But it's because of this that you'll find a lot of time that religious dogma and authority relieve a person of the responsibility of deciding on his or her own actions. So they're not holding themselves accountable because they feel like they don't have to. People will comply with a religious authority because they believe that the institution knows more than them, is stronger than them, and is less able to be corrupted than the average person. They accept that the leaders in this institution can be trusted to know God's will. So this is where we go back to the whole point of Wiccans worshiping the devil. The devil was a Christian construct. Wiccans don't need the threat of an external force to hold us accountable for our actions. We use karma and our own energy, knowing that whatever energy we put out is going to come back. And we'll get to that in a minute. While many religions focus on the God being the deity that is transcendent, Wiccans actually don't see ourselves as separate from deity. Our goddess and or God is not only transcendent, but he's immanent. He's here, or she is here, meaning deity is all present in the world. People come from and are a part of the divine energy, and deity is within everybody. You don't have to go to a church or a building to worship deity. You are part of deity. So like I said, we don't have a hierarchy in Wicca. It differs from most mainstream religions because there's no central authority. There's no level of clergy who make rules. Whether they're recognized or not by the government varies by local laws and whether the person seeks out that recognition. But it's made up of loosely connected and independent small groups who define their own spiritual beliefs and practices. So a lot of times these small groups are called covens, of course, and sometimes we do have a high priestess and or priest or a leader with some other title because they offer their skills to the group and direct its activities. So yes, they're an elder and they're a high priestess so that, for example, if we're conducting circle or a ceremony or a prayer or a vigil, that teacher or that high priestess will be the one to initiate the proceedings out of respect for her knowledge, but she doesn't consider herself to be better than anybody else in the group. She just simply guides the process. So my teacher was a high priestess, and after 2 years of study, I was designated to be a priestess as well. And I was given a given name by my priestess, which, if you know Wiccans, we don't actually share our given name because that's our power. That's our power that's been given to us by our spiritual guide. And when that name is given to you, you keep that very personal because if anyone gets a hold of that name, they can bring negative energy towards you. So we do have two sort of, rules, laws, ideologies that we follow. They're not rules, but when you hear them, it'll make sense. So since we believe deity is all present and we're all a part of it, that we're connected to each other in this independent circle or web of life. So any harm that I cause to the collectiveness, it's going to come back to me. Right? So this is where our two sort of rules come in, which is the Wiccan Rede and the threefold law. So the Wiccan Rede is 8 words the Wiccan Rede fulfill, and it harm none, do what you will. Or do as you will and harm none. So I'll give you a basic understanding of that. It basically says that following the Rede means to carry out your own will, but act in ways that cause the least harm to yourself, others, the earth, and all beings. Wiccans generally interpret the Rede to mean that a Wiccan should live and let live while respecting the sacredness of all life. They should think critically about the consequences of their actions before they act. Many Wiccans have expanded the scope of the Rede. They actually think that apathy, neglect, and failure to act, failure to stop abuse, suffering, or injustice also violates that Rede. So that's why you'll see a lot of witches coming forward right now because of the way the world is happening, things that are happening in this world. And the witches are seeing this injustice, and we're seeing all the things that are happening to the minority communities in this world, and we're all rising up. Because as far as we're concerned, since it's all connected, harm to anything or anyone is an act against the goddess and or God themselves. It does get a little complicated sometimes when it comes to can you defend yourself against someone who's attacking? Can you, what if you caused harm to someone to save someone else? There's a lot of specifics that you can get into, but the way that I see it is that everyone is on this earth for a journey. They're here to learn their own lesson, to contribute to that collective consciousness. And if I interrupt that stream of thought or that lesson being learned, then I'm harming the overall consciousness because that person will be doomed to repeat that lesson in the next lifetime, in the next lifetime, in the next lifetime. So while I can't say that I don't smile when karma comes back around to people sometimes, I don't physically wish the harm on another person ever because that's not up to me to make that decision. However, as a Wiccan, I can also understand that I'm not a member of certain minority communities and I haven't been discriminated against my whole life. So if someone else has a different feeling than I do, I accept that they have that feeling and I'm not going to judge them for that. Stick around for part 2, and if you haven't already, give me a follow, like, and share.